whoa, she looks guilty as hell. And then I'm looking at it and I'm saying, did you really say that? Mm-hmm. Did you really say that Caitlin Clark should think of Heavenly Stars, that she wouldn't be worth anything if she wasn't playing in the WNBA? Did you really say? See, all of these things that Nafisha called.
Picture this, a 22-year-old girl from Iowa just did something the WNBA couldn't accomplish in 27 years. She brought millions of eyes to women's basketball. You'd think the league would be celebrating, right? Wrong. Instead, the commissioner is absolutely furious. Stephen A. Smith just dropped something that changes everything. He's exposing a level of corporate jealousy so petty, so obvious, that it's basically self-sabotage in real time. This isn't about basketball anymore. This is about power, control, and what happens when one person threatens an entire system. The WNBA's leadership is losing their minds, and what comes next could reshape the entire league. Stay with me because this story gets darker the deeper you dig. And by the end, you'll understand why the commissioner might actually be destroying her own golden goose. It started with a 30-second ad. That's all it took. A commercial featuring Caitlin Clark, nothing revolutionary on the surface, just a polished production with her hitting impossible shots from everywhere on the court. Travis Scott was there. Travis Kelce was there. The production value was pristine, the energy electric, and the message crystal clear. Caitlin Clark is a superstar, not a WNBA player, not a rookie, a superstar. When this commercial dropped, something shifted inside WNBA headquarters. And we're not talking about quiet frustration. We're talking about tense closed-door meetings. We're talking about furious phone calls. We're talking about the kind of chaos that only happens when powerful people realize they've lost control of the narrative. Here's the thing most people don't understand. For nearly 3 decades, the WNBA controlled how stars were presented. The league decided which players would get pushed. The league decided which narratives would dominate. The league decided who was valuable. They built their entire system around this central idea that the league itself was bigger than any individual player. The shield mattered more than the name. The sisterhood mattered more than the superstar. The collective mattered more than the icon. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and that entire structure collapsed in a single season. This commercial wasn't just another endorsement deal. It was a declaration of independence. When you watched it, you didn't see the WNBA. You didn't see a league or a system or a collective movement. You saw a girl who didn't need permission from anyone. You saw someone operating on a completely different level than the corporate machinery that's supposed to define her career. The brands behind this ad, Gatorade, Wilson, the companies writing the massive checks, they didn't care about the league's messaging. They didn't care about the old hierarchy. They looked at what was actually happening in the culture and realized Caitlin Clark was the moment. She was the zeitgeist. She was the investment. And they moved faster than any corporate structure ever could. For Kathy Engelbert and the executives around her, watching this unfold was like watching someone hack into their own operating system. This commercial proved something they'd been desperately trying to deny. They weren't actually the brand builders. They weren't the ones creating excitement. They were just administrators managing something that was growing despite their efforts, not because of them. The anger wasn't about basketball. It was about ego. It was about competence. It was about a CEO hired to scale a business suddenly realizing she'd been outpaced by a 22-year-old who didn't even know she was in a competition. And the worst part, the entire world could see it happening in real time. Stephen A. Smith didn't just guess this was happening. He basically confirmed it through sources close to the situation. And when you listen to what he's saying, you start to understand the real psychology behind what's going on. This isn't a commissioner protecting her league. This is a leader panicking because her leadership is being questioned. This is someone terrified of being exposed as the wrong person for this moment. The commercial also did something else that was devastating to the league's self-image. It highlighted the gap between Clark's professional presentation and the WNBA's marketing efforts. When you compare the production quality, the creative direction, the global scope of her endorsements versus the league's own in-house marketing, the contrast is almost embarrassing. The WNBA's social media posts look amateur next to what Gatorade and State Farm are producing, and everyone knows it. That gap is a constant, humiliating reminder that the league's expensive executives are being outperformed by corporations that don't even specialize in sports marketing. They're being outperformed by brands that simply looked at reality and responded accordingly. But here's where it gets really dark. Instead of learning from these companies, instead of hiring better creative teams, instead of evolving their strategy, the response from the top has been pure resentment. The WNBA didn't celebrate this commercial. They didn't share it on their official accounts. They didn't put out a press release. They went silent, completely silent. That silence wasn't an accident. That was a message. That was the commissioner drawing a line in the sand. And in that moment, she revealed exactly what Stephen A. Smith had been saying all along. This wasn't about growing the league. This was about protecting power. This was about maintaining control. And if one player threatened that control, even if that player was literally saving the league's entire future, she would respond with jealousy and spite. That's where this story truly begins. Let's talk about the real crisis underneath all of this drama. Because the commercial isn't the actual problem. The commercial just exposed the problem that's been festering for years. Money, or more specifically, the massive, undeniable gap between what Caitlin Clark makes off the court versus what she makes on it. Think about this for a second. Caitlin Clark's base WNBA salary is around $76,000. That's her playing salary. That's what the league pays her to be, arguably, the most important player in women's basketball history. Meanwhile, her endorsement deals, the commercial we just talked about, her signature shoe deals, her sponsorship agreements, everything off the court, those deals are worth millions. We're talking about a situation where she makes roughly 30 to 40 times more money from endorsements than from actually playing basketball. For normal athletes in major leagues, this might not be as jarring. LeBron James makes more from endorsements than his NBA salary, sure, but his NBA salary is also over $40 million. The contrast isn't as brutal. With Caitlin Clark, the contrast is absolutely devastating. It's a visual representation of everything broken about the WNBA's business model. And every time she signs a new deal, every time a new commercial drops, every time a brand decides to invest in her, it sends the same message to everyone watching. The WNBA doesn't pay its stars nearly enough. The WNBA doesn't have the revenue to compete with corporate America. The WNBA is broken. That's the real nightmare for Cathy Engelbert. She wasn't hired to preside over a broken system. She was hired as a corporate executive, someone who was supposed to be elite at scaling businesses, growing revenue, and navigating the modern sports landscape. She was supposed to fix these problems, not have them exposed by a 22-year-old girl's shoe deal. Every major commercial featuring Clark is basically a neon sign flashing in the commissioner's face. Your league is not paying its talent. Your business model is failing. Your leadership is failing. Those are uncomfortable truths that bounce right back to her competence. If the WNBA had better revenue streams, better corporate partnerships, better infrastructure, Clark's salary wouldn't look so comically small next to her endorsement deals. But it does, and that's the commissioner's failure staring her in the face every single day. There's another layer to this too. When fans see Clark making millions in endorsements while playing for $76,000, it forces them to ask uncomfortable questions about the entire league structure. Why is the WNBA so broke if players like Clark are bringing in massive commercial interest? Why isn't that commercial money flowing back into player salaries? Why isn't there revenue sharing? Why is there such a fundamental disconnect between what these players are worth to corporate America and what the league is willing to pay them? These are questions that don't have good answers, at least not answers that make the league look competent. And Cathy Engelbert knows it. Every time a new commercial drops, every time a new endorsement deal is announced, she's reminded that her entire tenure is being questioned by the existence of this wage gap. That creates a very specific kind of anxiety. That creates an environment where resentment starts to fester. Think about it from her perspective for a moment. You're hired as the CEO. You're supposed to be the visionary. You're supposed to be the one building this league into a major force. Then a rookie arrives, and through no effort of the league's leadership, through no strategy dreamed up by corporate headquarters, millions of dollars in brand partnerships materialize. The brands don't need the league's permission. They don't need the league's infrastructure. They see value and they move. For someone in a position of power, that's absolutely emasculating. It proves you're not the architect of growth. You're just a middle manager overseeing something that grew in spite of your efforts. And the financial imbalance between her endorsement money and her playing salary is the perfect illustration of that failure. Here's the most telling part. Instead of using this as an opportunity to fix the business model, to attract better investors, to build better revenue streams that could actually pay players like Clark what they're worth, the response from the top has been to resent the endorsements themselves. It's like watching someone blame the thermometer for showing it's hot outside instead of turning on the air conditioning. The commissioner has a choice. She can evolve. She can learn from how brands are marketing to Caitlin Clark. She can study what Gatorade and State Farm are doing and build a better WNBA marketing strategy. She can use this moment to attract better corporate partners and increase revenue. Or she can stay bitter. She can watch her athlete get richer and richer through outside deals while her own league remains relatively flat, and she can resent it. She's chosen option 2, and that choice is poisoning everything. Corporate structures operate on a very simple principle: hierarchy. There's a chain of command. There's a person at the top who gets the credit, wields the power, makes the decisions. For years, that person in women's basketball was supposed to be Kathy Engelbert. She was the commissioner. She was the CEO. She was the authority figure everyone answered to. Then something happened that no CEO plan accounts for. One person became bigger than the entire structure. This is where the real psychological tension comes from. Because for the first time in her tenure, Kathy Engelbert isn't the most important person in women's basketball. She's not even close. When people think about the WNBA now, they think about Caitlin Clark. When corporate sponsors decide to invest in women's basketball, they're investing in Caitlin Clark. When TV ratings spike, it's because of Caitlin Clark. When arenas sell out, it's because of Caitlin Clark. The commissioner is background noise. And that's absolutely devastating for someone used to being in control. Think about what it means to be a CEO. You're supposed to be the visionary. You're supposed to set the direction. You're supposed to be the person who gets credit for success. You're supposed to be the authority figure who commands respect. You're supposed to be irreplaceable. Kathy Engelbert can't claim any of that right now, and it's eating her alive. The way this shows up isn't always direct. It's not like she's openly saying, "I resent Caitlin Clark." That would be career suicide. Instead, it shows up in the little things. It shows up in how slow the WNBA's official social media accounts are to post her highlights compared to other players. Fans have literally tracked this pattern all season. While NBA accounts instantly share LeBron highlights or Dijonai's highlights, WNBA accounts take hours or don't post at all when it's Caitlin Clark. That's not an accident. That's not a glitch in the system. That's resentment manifesting through institutional control. It's the commissioner using the only power she still has, control over the league's official channels, to minimize someone who's made her irrelevant. It's petty, it's obvious, and it's incredibly damaging. There's also the deeper issue of control itself. For years, the WNBA's leadership could tell players what to wear, who they could sign deals with, what they could say. The league maintained control through monopoly power. You want to play basketball professionally? You play in our league on our terms. But Caitlin Clark doesn't need that monopoly power anymore. She has global brands literally competing to give her money. She has leverage that completely transcends the league's authority. That loss of control is fundamentally threatening to someone like Kathy Engelbert. If players realize they don't need permission from the league to be valuable, if players realize they can build their own economy independent of league infrastructure, the entire power dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the commissioner isn't the boss anymore. She's just managing a league while her players build empires around her. That's a psychological nightmare for corporate leaders. They're trained to believe their position means something. They're trained to believe their authority is real and necessary. Watching someone prove you wrong is traumatic. It forces you to confront the reality that your power is conditional, fragile, and easily displaced by someone who actually has what the market wants. Stephen A. Smith picked up on this immediately. He understood that the anger coming from the league office wasn't about basketball. It was about existential threat. The commissioner is watching her relevance disappear in real time, and instead of adapting, she's trying to punish the person who represents that disappearance. This also explains the weird dynamic where the league seems to be less protective of Clark than they should be. When a commissioner is truly proud of a player, when that player represents the commissioner's success and vision, there's protection. There's celebration. There's an investment in that player's well-being and image. But when a commissioner resents a player, when that player makes the commissioner look bad, the protection evaporates. The celebration stops, and what emerges instead is a kind of cold distance. Maybe even a subtle hope that the player struggles, fails, or is brought down a notch. That's the environment Caitlin Clark is operating in, and everyone can feel it. The other players can feel it. The fans can feel it. The world can feel it. And it's changing how people view the WNBA's leadership. A competent CEO would have seen Caitlin Clark's rise as the ultimate validation of her hiring. She was brought in to scale the league. She was brought in to grow revenue. Caitlin Clark just did more for the WNBA's profile in one season than most executives accomplish in a decade. That's a win. That's a massive win. But Kathy Engelbert can't see it that way because her ego won't allow it. And that ego problem is becoming the league's biggest liability. Here's something that will absolutely shock you when you think about it. When Caitlin Clark's massive commercial dropped, when a production featuring Travis Scott and Travis Kelce featured her as the centerpiece, when a brand like Gatorade or Wilson or State Farm released content that generated millions of views and brought unprecedented attention to women's basketball, the official WNBA account went completely silent. No celebration, no press release, no retweet, no acknowledgement whatsoever. That silence is the smoking gun. That silence is the proof of everything Stephen A. Smith has been saying, because silence like that doesn't happen by accident in a professional sports organization. The WNBA has social media managers. They have PR departments. They have executives who monitor what's happening in the sports world 24/7. When major news breaks about their biggest star, they have systems in place to respond. But they chose not to. They actively chose silence. In normal professional sports leagues, this scenario plays out completely differently. When an NBA star gets a major commercial, the league celebrates it. They post about it. They use it as an opportunity to promote their own brand through their players' success. They understand that a rising tide lifts all boats. They understand that when LeBron James signs a massive endorsement deal or drops an incredible commercial, it benefits the entire NBA ecosystem. It puts eyes on basketball. It sells merchandise. It creates cultural momentum. The WNBA knows this intellectually. They have the same business textbooks as every other sports league. They understand basic marketing theory, but they didn't apply it to Caitlin Clark. They chose silence instead. That choice tells you everything about the emotional state of the league's leadership. It tells you that they're not thinking like business people right now. They're thinking like scorned competitors. They're thinking like people who have been wounded by something. When your default response to your biggest star's major commercial is to ignore it completely, you're not operating from a place of strategic thinking. You're operating from a place of hurt. This is actually one of the most damaging things a sports organization can do, because that silence doesn't go unnoticed. Fans see it. New viewers who came to the WNBA because of Caitlin Clark see it. They see the disconnect between the excitement surrounding Clark and the league's own cold shoulder. They start to pick up on the hostility. They start to wonder why the league is acting like its biggest star is a problem rather than an asset. And that's when they start to form opinions about WNBA leadership, not positive opinions. Opinions that the league is being run by people who are petty, jealous, and more concerned with protecting their egos than growing their sport. That's a reputation problem that goes way beyond basketball. Compare this to how the NBA handled LeBron James going to the Lakers. The league could have been bitter about his power. They could have resented his ability to shape his own career. Instead, they embraced it. They understood that LeBron James choosing to play in the NBA is good for the NBA, even if he's doing it partly on his own terms. They got out of the way and let the market work. The WNBA is doing the exact opposite. They're actively trying to minimize the biggest thing that's ever happened to their sport. They're using their official channels to send a message, We don't celebrate you. We don't acknowledge your success. We're not going to use our platform to amplify your achievement. You're on your own. That message is absolutely toxic for a player-commissioner relationship, and it's toxic for the league's relationship with its fan base. Fans are not stupid. They can see when an organization is being petty. They can feel when leadership is rooting against its own players. And when they feel that, they start to look elsewhere. They start to wonder if they should be supporting an organization that treats its stars with resentment rather than pride. What makes this even worse is what the silence reveals about the league's priorities. If the WNBA is so focused on building the overall brand, on protecting the collective, on emphasizing that it's bigger than any individual player, then this is the perfect moment to prove it. They could have posted the commercial and said something like, "Proud to see our stars thriving in the marketplace. This is good for the entire league." They could have used Clark's commercial success to justify increasing player salaries. They could have turned this moment into an opportunity to fix some of the structural problems that the wage gap revealed. Instead, they went silent. And in that silence, they revealed that they don't actually believe any of their own messaging about the collective. They revealed that they care more about their hurt feelings than about growing women's basketball. They revealed that they're willing to sabotage their own momentum rather than celebrate a player who makes them feel small. That's the ultimate display of poor leadership, and everyone can see it. One of the most dangerous consequences of what's happening in WNBA headquarters is something that doesn't show up in box scores or highlight reels. It shows up in the locker room. It shows up in the way players interact with each other. It shows up in the fouls that are called and the ones that aren't. It shows up in the subtle signals that flow downward from leadership. When a commissioner treats a star player with resentment, that message doesn't stay confined to the executive suite. It spreads. It permeates the entire organization. It tells everyone else, it's open season on this player. The boss doesn't have her back. The boss actually resents her success, so neither should you. This is where Stephen A. Smith's analysis gets really dark, because he's not just talking about corporate dysfunction anymore. He's connecting league office behavior directly to on-court violence. And once you start looking at it from that angle, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. All season, Caitlin Clark has dealt with an unusual amount of physical play. Eye pokes, blind side hits, hard fouls that seem designed to send a message rather than defend the basketball. Some of these fouls are so excessive that they draw technical fouls or suspensions, but the pattern of them is undeniable. There's something different about the physicality Clark faces compared to other stars. Now, you could attribute this to a lot of things. You could say that other players are trying to intimidate a rookie. You could say that the level of play in the WNBA is naturally more physical. You could say that Clark's style of play invites more contact. All of that might be partially true. But you also have to consider the environment that leadership is creating. Because when players see that the commissioner is not celebrating their star, when they see that the league office is treating a player with hostility rather than protection, that sends a very specific signal. It says the commissioner doesn't care about this player. It says her success is not valued. It says she's expendable. In that environment, other players feel less obligation to respect boundaries. They feel like they can be more aggressive. They feel like there won't be consequences because the commissioner doesn't have her back. The protection that leadership should provide evaporates, and what emerges instead is a kind of open hostility. This is exactly how toxic organizational cultures develop. A leader's attitude flows downward. If the person at the top is resentful and bitter, everyone below them gets permission to be resentful and bitter. If the person at the top is protective and celebratory, everyone below them feels that too. It's not conscious most of the time. It's just how organizational dynamics work. The WNBA's culture right now is one where the commissioner is basically saying, "I don't celebrate this player's success." In an organization like that, other players pick up on the signal immediately, and some of them act on it. Some of them translate that resentment into on-court physicality that crosses the line. The league's response to these fouls has been notably slow and weak. When flagrant fouls happen to Caitlin Clark, there's not the same immediate response you'd see if they happen to other stars. There's a delay. There's a lack of urgency. There's an almost passive acceptance that this is just how things are going to be. That's not coincidence. That's organizational culture. When leadership doesn't protect a player, the referees pick up on it. The league office's enforcement picks up on it. The entire system starts to view that player as someone who deserves less protection, someone who's fair game, someone whose safety is a lower priority. It's a subtle process, but it's devastating. Because what starts as executive resentment can eventually manifest as physical harm. What starts as not celebrating a commercial can eventually contribute to a culture where rough play against that player is accepted and even encouraged. Stephen A. Smith understands this. He's been in sports media long enough to see how these dynamics play out. He's calling out not just the resentment, but the consequences of that resentment. He's saying that when you have a leader who treats her biggest star with spite instead of pride, you create an environment where that star becomes vulnerable, where the safety nets that should protect her disappear, where the collective responsibility to look out for each other evaporates. This is the most serious criticism in the entire analysis, because it's not just about corporate dysfunction anymore, it's about player safety. It's about whether the commissioner is creating an environment that protects her athletes or one that puts them at risk. And based on what's been happening all season, based on the fouls, based on the lack of protection, based on the cold treatment, it seems clear that Kathy Engelbert has chosen resentment over protection. That's a choice that has consequences, not just for the league's culture, but potentially for a player's physical well-being. To truly understand why Kathy Engelbert and the WNBA's old guard are reacting to Caitlin Clark with such hostility, you have to understand the history behind it. Because this isn't random. This isn't just one person being petty. This is a clash between two completely different philosophies about what women's basketball is supposed to be. For decades, the WNBA has been built on a very specific narrative. It's been framed as a collective movement, a sisterhood, a cause. The messaging has always centered on the idea that the league itself is bigger than any individual player, that the shield matters more than the name, that women's basketball is about the system, the history, the struggle, the progress, not about individuals becoming superstars. This philosophy made sense in the early years, when the league was fighting for survival, when every win was a victory for the entire movement, when the focus had to be on building a foundation rather than building stars. The collective sisterhood narrative was actually powerful. It created a sense of unity. It gave fans a reason to care beyond just basketball. But there was a dark side to this philosophy too. Because when you make the league bigger than the player, when you prioritize the collective over the individual, you also create a system where players are supposed to be subservient to leadership, where players are supposed to understand that they're part of something bigger and accept their role accordingly, where ambition and individual achievement are viewed with suspicion because they might threaten the collective. The old guard of WNBA leadership believes in this philosophy deeply. They see themselves as the protectors of the movement. They see themselves as the guardians of what women's basketball represents. And they see a player like Caitlin Clark, someone who brings individual superstardom, who operates on her own terms, who has her own gravitational pull, as a threat to everything they've built. This isn't just about money or marketing. It's about ideology. It's about the fundamental question of what women's basketball should be. Should it be about building a collective movement where the league controls the narrative and directs the energy? Or should it be about allowing individual players to become authentic superstars and letting the market sort out what people actually want to watch? Caitlin Clark represents the latter, and that terrifies the old guard. You can see this philosophy reflected in how they've treated Clark since she arrived. The initial pushback against her getting an Olympic roster spot wasn't really about basketball. It was about hierarchy. It was about enforcing the idea that you have to pay your dues, respect the veterans, understand that you're part of a system that's bigger than you. The message was, wait your turn, understand your place, don't get too big for your britches. But the market had a different message, and the market won. The old guard didn't like that, because it suggested that their philosophy might be wrong. That maybe the way to grow women's basketball isn't through collective messaging and institutional control. Maybe it's through allowing individual stars to shine and letting organic enthusiasm develop. Maybe it's about understanding that the market doesn't care about your ideology. The market cares about what's authentic and exciting. That realization is the source of a lot of the bitterness, because it undermines everything the old guard believes in. It suggests that decades of messaging, decades of trying to build the league through collective branding, decades of asking players to prioritize the movement over their individual success. It suggests all of that might have been a less effective strategy than just letting Caitlin Clark be herself and letting the market respond. The commercial situation perfectly encapsulates this clash. The WNBA's old messaging would have shown Caitlin Clark as part of a team, part of a league, part of a sisterhood. The commercial that actually dropped showed her as an individual superstar. It showed her as someone operating on a totally different level. It showed exactly what the old guard feared, a player who doesn't need the league's permission or validation to be successful. That's why they reacted so negatively. It wasn't about the commercial itself. It was about what the commercial represented philosophically. It was about a rejection of their entire framework for how women's basketball should operate. Here's the thing, though. The market has spoken. Millions of new viewers came to the WNBA because of Caitlin Clark's individual stardom. The commercial didn't drive interest by emphasizing sisterhood or collective struggle. It drove interest by showing an incredible athlete doing incredible things. It drove interest by being authentic and exciting and real. That's a harsh lesson for the old guard. It suggests that their philosophy, however well-intentioned, might not have been the best path forward for growing the sport. And some people handle that kind of correction with grace and humility. They learn, they adapt, they thank the person who showed them a better way. But Cathy Engelbert and the league's leadership are handling it with resentment. They're handling it by trying to minimize the threat. They're handling it by maintaining their old framework and hoping that Caitlin Clark eventually understands her place in the hierarchy. That approach will fail because markets don't wait for hierarchies to catch up. Markets move forward. And the WNBA's leadership is stuck in the past, unable to accept that Caitlin Clark has already rewritten the future. For years, professional sports leagues have operated on a very simple principle. The league has the power. The league decides which players matter. The league controls exposure. The league controls the money. And because players need the league to survive and thrive, the league can demand compliance. Players are dependent on the league for their paycheck, for their platform, for their relevance. That's the fundamental power dynamic that's allowed commissioners and executives to maintain control. But with Caitlin Clark, that dynamic has completely reversed, and no one in the WNBA's leadership seems prepared to handle it. Think about what's happened. Caitlin Clark arrived, and instead of needing the WNBA to make her relevant, the WNBA needed her to stay relevant. She didn't need the league to negotiate endorsement deals. The brands came to her. She didn't need the league to build a global platform. She already had one. She didn't need the league to tell her what matters. The market was already telling her exactly what matters. This is a complete inversion of the traditional power structure, and it terrifies people who have built their entire careers on the assumption that their power is permanent and unchangeable. Cathy Engelbert's entire identity as commissioner is based on the idea that she's in control, that she makes the decisions, that players answer to her, that the league is bigger than any individual. But Caitlin Clark just proved that's not true. She proved that a single player can be bigger than the league. She proved that market forces are more powerful than institutional power. She proved that if you're valuable enough, if you're authentic enough, if you're what the culture actually wants, you don't need permission from anyone. That's a complete nightmare for someone in Cathy Engelbert's position, because it means her power is conditional. It means her authority is fragile. It means that another player could wake up tomorrow and realize they don't actually need the WNBA as much as the WNBA needs them. And if that happens at scale, the entire system collapses. The way Engelbert is responding to this loss of power is by trying to reassert control in petty ways. By ignoring Clark's commercial, by being slow to celebrate her achievements, by allowing the hostile environment to persist. These are the tools available to someone who's lost the ability to directly control a star's opportunities. But this approach is backfiring spectacularly. Because every time Engelbert tries to minimize Clark, every time the WNBA's official channels ignore her achievements, every time leadership treats her with coldness instead of celebration, fans see it. And they don't blame Clark. They blame the league. They see an organization trying to punish its biggest star for being too successful. That's a massive strategic mistake. Because power dynamics in sports are actually quite simple. If you want to maintain influence, you have to align with the winners. You have to celebrate the successful people. You have to be associated with positive momentum. If you align yourself against the momentum, if you position yourself as an obstacle rather than a facilitator, people will view you as an obstacle. Kathy Engelbert is rapidly becoming viewed as an obstacle. The obstacle to Caitlin Clark's rise. The obstacle to women's basketball's growth. The obstacle to progress. And once you're branded as an obstacle, it's incredibly hard to recover that reputation. Here's what would actually work. If Engelbert publicly embraced Clark's success, if she celebrated the commercial, if she used Clark as a symbol of the WNBA's bright future, if she positioned herself as someone who helped create the environment where Clark could thrive, suddenly, Engelbert would be riding the wave of momentum. Suddenly, she'd be seen as a visionary leader who hired the right people and built the right infrastructure and allowed the best talent to flourish. But that would require her to accept that she's not the main character in this story anymore. That would require her to be okay with someone else getting the spotlight. That would require her to have enough confidence in her own value that she doesn't feel threatened by Clark's success. And based on everything we're seeing, Kathy Engelbert doesn't have that kind of confidence. She's operating from a place of scarcity and fear instead of abundance and vision. She's trying to protect her territory instead of growing the whole pie. She's trying to diminish a star instead of amplifying her. That approach is guaranteed to fail because power is shifting in real time. Caitlin Clark doesn't need Kathy Engelbert's permission to be successful. She never will again. The commissioner can either accept this new reality and try to be part of the solution, or she can cling to an old power structure and watch it crumble. The irony is devastating. By trying to maintain control over something she can no longer control, by trying to minimize someone she can't minimize, by responding with resentment instead of vision, Kathy Engelbert is actually hastening the very outcome she's trying to prevent. She's proving that she's not the leader the WNBA needs for this moment. And everyone can see it. Stephen A. Smith's exposure of this situation isn't just sports commentary. It's a prediction. Because if the WNBA's leadership doesn't change course, if they don't fundamentally shift how they relate to Caitlin Clark and what she represents, this situation is going to get exponentially worse. The damage that's being done right now is already substantial, but it's only the beginning. Think about what happens next season if the current dynamic persists. Caitlin Clark gets even more endorsement deals, more commercials, more global exposure. The contrast between her commercial success and her WNBA salary becomes even more glaring. The wage gap becomes an even bigger story. Meanwhile, the league office continues to be slow-walking her highlights, refusing to celebrate her achievements, maintaining that cold distance. What message does that send to fans? What message does that send to new viewers? What message does that send to other players about whether it's safe to be successful in this league? You start to look like an organization that punishes excellence. You start to look like an organization that's hostile to its own stars. You start to look like an organization that's dying. Because that's what this really is, an organization in decline using petty tactics to try to maintain relevance instead of evolving to meet the moment. And people can sense that. Fans can sense that. Media can sense that. And once an organization gets that reputation, it's incredibly hard to reverse. The real question is whether Kathy Engelbert has the self-awareness to understand what's happening and the courage to change course. Because this is fixable. She could wake up tomorrow and decide to fully embrace Caitlin Clark's success. She could celebrate the commercial. She could use her platform to amplify Clark's achievements. She could position the WNBA as the league that birthed this superstar. She could show the world that the WNBA is confident enough in its own strength to celebrate when its players thrive. That would completely change the narrative. Suddenly, the commissioner would look like a visionary. Suddenly, the league would look like it's growing and improving. Suddenly, the culture would shift from resentment to celebration. That's the path forward that actually works. But it requires accepting that the power dynamic has shifted. It requires accepting that Caitlin Clark is bigger than the WNBA now, at least in the short term. It requires accepting that the best thing the commissioner can do is get out of the way and let the market work. Some leaders can do that. Some leaders have enough confidence and vision to embrace a moment they didn't create and don't control. But all evidence suggests Kathy Engelbert is not that kind of leader. She's the kind of leader who responds to threats to her authority with resentment rather than adaptation. And that's going to cost the WNBA dearly. Because here's what happens when a league fights against its biggest star instead of celebrating her. The star gets bigger anyway, but the league's reputation gets smaller. The league becomes associated with jealousy and pettiness instead of excellence and growth. Fans start rooting against the organization and for the player. Sponsors start noticing that the league's brand is becoming toxic, and eventually, the commissioner's seat gets uncomfortable. There are also larger questions about how this affects the entire franchise structure. If players see that the league office will resent their success instead of celebrate it, if they see that superstars get treated with coldness instead of protection, if they see that alignment with leadership is actually a disadvantage, they're going to make different choices. They're going to be more aggressive in negotiations. They're going to be less willing to compromise for the good of the league. They're going to look for ways to build their own power bases outside of league infrastructure. That's how ecosystems collapse. When the incentives get inverted, when the reward for success becomes punishment instead of celebration, the system starts to break down. And the WNBA is dangerously close to that breaking point. The tragic part is that this moment didn't have to be a crisis. Caitlin Clark's success was a gift to the WNBA. It was unprecedented. It was exactly what the league had been praying for. A generational talent, massive interest, global appeal. The kind of cultural moment that changes sports forever. But instead of embracing it, the leadership responded with jealousy. And now they're watching that gift turn into a liability. They're watching their opportunity slip away because they couldn't handle someone else being the center of attention. Stephen A. Smith is right to be angry about it. He's right to expose it. Because this isn't just about basketball. This is about whether women's basketball gets to have the future it deserves, or whether it gets held back by leadership that's more concerned with power and control than with growth and excellence. The next move belongs to Kathy Engelbert. She can lead the WNBA forward into an unprecedented moment of success, or she can let her resentment destroy it. Based on everything we've seen so far, it seems like she's already made her choice. This isn't a story about basketball anymore. It's a story about power. It's a story about what happens when someone threatens an established system by being authentically, undeniably better at capturing the culture's attention than the system itself. It's about a commissioner so threatened by irrelevance that she'd rather resent her league's brightest future than celebrate it. Caitlin Clark didn't ask for this. She just showed up and played basketball better than anyone expected. She just signed endorsement deals because brands saw value. She just became a cultural phenomenon through pure authenticity and talent. She's done nothing wrong, but she's being punished anyway, through petty silence and institutional coldness and an environment where other players feel permission to be more aggressive toward her. Stephen A. Smith saw what was happening. He called it out with precision, and he made something clear. This is self-sabotage at the highest levels of sports leadership. The WNBA had the chance to ride Caitlin Clark's wave into unprecedented heights. Instead, they're resisting it, they're fighting it, and they're going to lose. The question now is whether Kathy Engelbert wakes up before it's too late. Whether she can find the humility and vision to actually lead the league into its future, instead of clinging to control of its past. Based on what we're seeing, don't hold your breath.